Good morning. Today we look at Acts chapter 21, verses 18 through 40. Um, and well, before I start on that, yesterday I had my first day of physical therapy, and it was kind of nice to know that my arm can move the way it's supposed to. And I mean, I wasn't moving it myself, but the therapist was making it move and work, and it doesn't creak and pop and make noises like it used to. So that was a good thing. Tomorrow morning, Sunday, of course, third Sunday, we'll have Holy Communion. We'll meet at Mabel and Sutton at 9, and that'll be live on Facebook. And then at 10:30 at Our Savior's in McHenry. We'll have worship again that way and get back into the regular Sunday morning schedules here. So in our reading today, yesterday it finished up with Paul and his traveling companions arriving in Jerusalem and receiving a warm welcome. And today we see that they come before James and the elders. And James was one of the leaders of the early church, very much believed to be, this James to be a brother of Jesus. There was James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and then this James as well. But so the church leaders were gathered together to talk with Paul and the others and to hear the news that they had brought, but then also to settle some rumors that were being spoken about Paul and some of his teachings. And so some of the rumors had been that Paul was teaching the Jews that lived out in the Gentile areas, that weren't in Jerusalem, but he was teaching those Jews that they no longer had to follow the law of Moses. They no longer had to follow the customs and, to circumcise and to do, the things that a good Jewish person would do. And of course, we know that that's not true. Paul wasn't insinuating that at all. He was telling the Gentiles that they didn't need to become Jewish. They didn't need to circumcise. They didn't need to do all of these things before they could become Christian. And that's agreed upon, in verse 24, 25. They say that concerning the Gentiles, we've decided that they don't have to observe these Jewish customs, but they should not eat things offered to idols, and they had refrain from sexual immorality and from blood, from things strangled, and so they had a few regulations, a few things that way that the Gentiles should follow, but basically it was if the Gentiles accepted Jesus as the risen Lord, that was good enough. But the problem came that there were these rumors about Paul, and we know what rumors can do and false stories can do, and how it can just be so upsetting for so many people when they don't have the true facts. And so because of all of these rumors and everything that are going around, James and the elders have said to Paul, that if you will do these rites of purification for yourself, and it's, in verse 23, here's what you need to do. We have 4 men have taken a vow. Take them, be purified with them, pay their expenses so that they can shave their heads, that they will all know that the things of which they were informing you are nothing, but that you do walk orderly and follow the laws. And so that just seems kind of a strange thing to me, that Paul would have to take these 4 people and, they would shave their heads as a sign of Paul's purity so they did that. But that didn't satisfy the people. Because we find in verse 26, it says, Paul took the men with him the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple and to make an offering, and the 7 days of this were almost ended, and the Jews from Asia get all stirred up, and they get the crowd stirred up. It's just, it's reminiscent of the crowd against Jesus, of course. It's a riot starts because some people start making noise and just don't shut up, and they got everybody excited, and they were they were shouting out against Paul that this is the man who teaches that all men everywhere are against the people, they're against the law. And he brought Greeks into the temple, and to bring a Greek, a foreigner, into the temple would be sacrilege. It would be absolutely forbidden. It would, the temple would no longer be holy, and you think about that, if we looked at our churches as a place that if a sinner came in the door, or if a foreigner came in the door of our church, that our church would no longer be holy. It would be, a terrible thing to happen. Rather, our doors are open and hopefully are welcoming. And I know that's not true all over the place, but our faith, our religion, our belief in God, doesn't depend upon that building at all. We respect the church building as we should, and it's regarded as a holy place. It's a place where we gather together to worship, to support each other in our faith, and to be encouraged in all ways that way. But to bring a foreigner in, or to bring someone in that way, definitely wouldn't have any negative impact on our church buildings or anything that way. But these people, I got them all stirred up, and the city is disturbed. The people run together. They seize Paul and they pull him out of the temple and begin to stone him. They're determined. They're going to kill Paul. And Paul has been beaten and stoned and things before, and has somehow managed to survive even when they thought he was dead before. But all of this is going on, and the commander of the garrison, the Roman commander, then brings some of the troops to restore order. And Paul ends up being arrested then, and but it's the Romans come and intercede, and they stop the beating, and Paul is bound with 2 chains, and he was asked, well, what has this person done? And among the multitude cried out one and some another, a bunch of lies again being talked about that way. And the commander, couldn't figure out what the truth was, so he takes Paul and the others to the barracks. And then in verse 37, says, as Paul was about to be led into the barracks, he spoke to the commander, and he spoke to them in Greek. And this commander was surprised that Paul could speak the Greek language, because he was kind of under the impression that this Paul was this Egyptian that had been there a few years earlier and had stirred up a lot of people and led them up on the mountain, and had caused great chaos. And there were several, quite a few Israelites were killed and taken captive, but the Egyptian had gotten away, and so this commander was thinking, well, this Paul is probably this same person, but then when Paul speaks Greek, he realizes, well, he's different than this Egyptian was, and he says to him, well, you're not the Egyptian. And Paul says to him, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I implore you to let me speak to the people. So Paul then has an opportunity to speak to the people. And this chapter ends with, so he had given him permission, the commander had. Paul stands on the stairs and motions with his hands to the people. And there was a great silence, and he begins to speak. And so on Monday, we will look at chapter 22 and the first part of chapter 23, and we will see what it is that Paul has to say to these people in his defense, but then also, Paul continually preaches Christ. And that's what we do. And that's, as a pastor, it's one of the things that I am always aware of. is that we preach Christ crucified and risen, and that we are saved in and through that by the love of God.